Professor, thanks all for joining us on Newsnight this evening. I mean, the significance of actually having such a launch, the Indigenous Language Action Forum as well, and when we're looking at the fact that the year 2019 has been dubbed as the Year of Indigenous Languages. Talk to us really about the significance of such a dubbing.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. I think I can just mention one or two things in relation to the significance. The first point I'd like to make is that we are really inspired by our linguistic infrastructure, which is up to scratch. If you think back, we seem to have very good policies which talk to language. I can also mention the recent one, which is the use of the Official Languages Act, which is 2012, when it was sort of introduced. But we don't seem to have a clear movement in terms of implementing these policies. I think that's the first inspiration that is driving us towards putting together such a structure, which we think is going to put a little bit of pressure to government and all the relevant structures that must take the work on forward. The second issue, of course, ties up with our constitution. We do realize that we have a constitution that makes clear provisions on language matters. And again, we don't see much that has been done. Of course, there are interventions that have been carried through, but not much has been done in terms of taking them forward across sectors. The third one relates, of course, to the UNESCO issue that we have just cited, upon which we see our base as the forum to say, if a national or rather a global structure could also, beat the same drum and link up with what we're trying to do, why are we not moving? So I think the UNESCO document is very clear in terms of its action plan, and the action plan does resonate with what we're trying to do in terms of looking after the rights of the indigenous languages and the people that speak these languages.
Now, Professor, I'm sure you'd agree with me that especially when it comes to the South African context, we're fantastic when it comes to the formation of policies as well as having policy documents. Our implementation side is where we're lagging behind. And I mean, if you look at the statistics that are presented, I mean, it's about 40% of the world's population does not get taught in a language that they speak or understand. Furthermore, bringing it into the South African context, in South Africa, fewer than 10% of the population speak English as the mother tongue. However, English continues to dominate in the way in which people are actually taught, especially when it comes to grade 4, for example, where the primary language of learning from grade 4 now becomes English. I'm going to take it even a step further. You saw with reports earlier on, in fact, at the criticism of our very own finance minister, Tito Mboweni, who was speaking about the phasing out of Afrikaans, and that was at the University of Pretoria, obviously to adopt English as a medium. Surely then, with these statistics in mind, with the implementation that's going against the very same thing that you're speaking, that means that seriously, when it comes to the South African context, maybe we need to start re-looking at the way in which we implement even some of those causes which are good causes that we want to champion.
You're absolutely right. Actually, you're 100% correct. I mean, those statistics that you're highlighting are very correct. I can just make a point here to say, I think we are flooded and confronted by some attitudes. We can begin to start by looking at the education sector to say the tendency, I think we are all to blame about this. The tendency is that we feel strongly that better education can only come through the medium of English, which is incorrect. And that is a very bad attitude that we display as a nation, I mean, as we continue to enroll our students, our learners in the various schools. And that's the first one. Of course, the second one relates to the issue of employability. I don't think it's also fair to keep beating that drum by saying, if you are educated through the medium of English, better chances of employment are huge compared to someone who has been, educated through the medium of an African language. I think that has to be corrected because to a point, one will understand sometimes the parents that they feel strongly that English has a way or it puts you in an advantage of sort when it comes to employability. Again, we could look at issues of development outside of our borders and look at other countries, the way in which they have developed. And they've put language in the center of their development. I mean, you look at China, you look at Japan and other countries. We're not saying English should be, done away with. What we're saying is the languages should be given the right equally. And right to a language also means that people should also have a choice to speak the language that they understand across the spectrum.
Or be taught in a language that they understand. So then in light of that, would you say that the Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, I mean, he came under severe criticism after actually saying that perhaps in the next 30 years' time, we actually are going to regret the decision of even phasing out Afrikaans as a medium of teaching. And this one he was referring to the University of Pretoria. So in light of this, would you say that the minister had a point? He was actually correct in saying, look, maybe we should start looking at incorporating other indigenous languages into our learning system, whether from grade 4 or whether from at a university level, instead of us trying to phase out an already existing language, which in this case would be Afrikaans, and in the way in which we teach in schools, and incorporate instead of depleting?
The minister was 100% correct. If we're talking diversity, which is one of the critical components in our constitution, how do we begin to embrace diversity without taking due cognizance of the languages that we have in the country? I mean, the minute we say Afrikaans should be done away with, what are we saying about other African languages, for example? And I think one should also understand that Afrikaans has done a good job in terms of development, in terms of uplifting the standards of the people who speak such a language. And we should also be following the footsteps that have been advanced through the introduction and development and the blossoming of such a language. So I don't see how, we are going to go forward if we then say we should be a monolingual state, because, most people won't leave the country. Most people will still, be in South Africa, even if we consider, a monolingual policy. I think we also need to be very, very conscious about the rights as they have been provided for in the Constitution.
Well, Professor, we're going to leave our conversation there, but insightful points indeed, as you've mentioned there, about the importance of upholding our indigenous languages, obviously as proposed by UNESCO as well. Professor Monwabisi Rakhalakhala, who was just giving us insights around, adopting indigenous languages and most importantly, being able to preserve it as such.